Getting closer. Okay, well, let me introduce Jeff real quick. Strawberry Fields is actually a fascinating place. I've been out there, and so is Jeff Leon, who is going to tell us about it. Jeff worked in the corporate world for over 3 decades before retiring to the family's country house in Amsterdam, making the homestead all about sustainable living and also sharing it with the public. So he's not just an advocate for conservation, he actually lives it. And he's going to tell us about Strawberry Fields' road to net zero.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah, and hello to you all. Welcome to this Zoom presentation, and thanks to ECOS for this opportunity to share with you a call to climate action, net zero now, and for promoting it beyond ECOS to Union College and to the Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. I'm hoping that this slide presentation about my road to net zero will spur all of you to take more action against climate chaos, the primary reason I embarked on this trip to net zero. There's big goals in those words, and I believe from my experience that they are well worth the effort of taking the trip. Before going to the slides, I'll just introduce myself a little bit further. These days, I introduce myself as the steward of Strawberry Fields. I'm also known as an environmentalist and conservationist, not by training, but by doing. In the slideshow, I'll tell you more about Strawberry Fields and how it came about over the past 20 years. Recent years have been particularly dedicated to figuring out how to get everyone to electrify everything with renewable energy and thus to decarbonize their lives. I grew up in suburban New Jersey, and what I now know was a recent 150 home development on a bulldozed farm. Now I'm an urban suburban refugee living my rural dream in the third half of my life. I am a dreamer, and I imagine a future that has a brighter climate forecast than we're looking at right now. I've been environmentally concerned for 60 years and am long past the point of certainty that the climate emergency is existentially real for future generations, worse than we thought, and faster advancing than was predicted by scientists, disbelieved by many in the past. I doubt there's any need to convince this audience of that, nor of the following further conclusions. Doing less harm to our environment, recycling, more fuel-efficient cars, eating local food are all good things. There's many more things like that many people do, and I'm sure, again, many people on this Zoom are, but it's absolutely not enough, nor are long-term efforts to help others do less harm enough, nor are natural climate solutions enough, nor are carbon credits enough. I know that the people in this audience would recognize that, and also recognize that even though the climate impact might be reduced by those actions, there is still an impact that planet Earth cannot afford to incur. We should keep doing those things, but we must each find more substantial things that we can also do, each and every one of us, besides harm reduction, have to take more concrete actions to eliminate, not just limit, to eliminate our use of fossil fuel. We have to examine honestly and realistically how we are or will use fossil fuels in our lives, with the biggest uses first, and eliminate them. That's what we have to do if we really want to reverse the climate emergency. We have to stop burning the planet, figuratively and literally. And I quote the United Nations Secretary General on that point. That's the pessimistic side of the story. The good news is that a lot has changed, even in the last 2 years since I first presented this slideshow to ECOS. To put it simply, the move to decarbonize has picked up more speed than most people dared hope. Not that there aren't lots of further obstacles, but big things are happening. For example, most people know now that it is easy to buy renewable electricity delivered by the grid or by your own solar panels. Anyone with an electric bill can make that change online or with a phone call. In the US and globally, installing new renewable electric generating capacity is far cheaper than any other fuel, fossil or nuclear. In 2022, Europe produced more electricity from solar and wind than from oil and coal, spurred in part by the Ukrainian war. So this is the first thing that everyone should do. Make sure your electricity supply is renewable, preferably solar and wind. In terms of using it, vehicles, cars, and other kinds of vehicles are a big part of creating climate change. Electric vehicle sales are increasing rapidly. In the US, now most manufacturers have models that you can order, although realistically, there are some production delays still there from COVID and other reasons. And you have to be patient with the dealers. This is a big change for them, selling electric cars rather than gas cars. Abroad, the 5 Nordic countries top the list of EV adoption, led by Norway with 80% last year. 80% of the vehicles sold in Norway last year were EVs. And note that one of the most common concerns about EVs is winter range. Oh, I won't be able to go far enough. But the coldest countries in Europe have the highest global EV adoption rates. Go figure. How does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because it's one more scare tactic to try to keep people away from going EV. China's EV adoption is 13%. The US is 5%. But if you think that Tesla is by far the biggest and most successful global EV maker, take a look at the Chinese car company BYD that has greater global EV sales volume than Tesla and is about to make Tesla a niche brand in China. Finally, who hasn't heard about heat pumps in the media? 2 years ago, I got a lot of blank looks and questions about using heat pumps for home and hot water heating and air conditioning. The first question is, what are they? Now, many more people are asking whether a heat pump should replace their current heating technology, and often the answer is yes. These 3 sectors I just mentioned are the essences of the prescription I gave 2 years ago to ECOS and others. Electrify everything that uses fossil fuel and everything already electric with renewable energy. That's the mantra, electrify everything with renewable energy. Today, those things can all be done much easier. There are less reasons than ever to doubt that necessity, nor to succumb to scare tactics like generation capacity or range anxiety or batteries blowing up. And nor are there any reasons now to delay taking action. Think, for example, about personal transportation. If you're getting around today in a gas-powered vehicle, or will be, and are still driving in 20 years, you'll almost certainly be driving an EV. Why wait? You'll wonder why you waited so long. The following slideshow was first developed for a climate action symposium hosted by the town of Bethlehem in 2018. Let me give a shout out to the town of Bethlehem for being a municipal leader in addressing climate change as a local government. That presentation was like a travel log, the road to net zero. Here we go. By 2021, in my first Zoom with ECOS and other organizations, it became a call to action with a lot of words about the weather-related natural disasters in our own region, as well as around the world, and about dealing with climate anxiety or climate depression. I still felt at that time there were a lot of people that needed to be convinced. Today, it's still a call to action. The overall prescription is the same, and the individual actions are easier than ever to take. I'm hoping that no one here is here just for a travelogue, and that you're all going to commit yourselves to taking more action to eliminate your use of fossil fuels. The change needed globally that depends more on us in the developed countries to individually change some of our habits. In my experience, following this prescription has improved my quality of life and my cost of living. The big benefit, though, is that if enough of us get off the oil, we can start to be hopeful about reversing climate chaos for future generations. We cannot hope for a better forecast than that. Thank you for listening. And Sarah, if you could put the first slide up, thank you very much. There we go. So Strawberry Fields is located in the town of Amsterdam, eastern Montgomery County. Its 118 acres are protected in perpetuity from overdevelopment. We operate on a net zero sustainable basis in my homestead, which you can see in the background of this picture. Strawberry Fields also contains, besides the family home, a working farm and a nature preserve with public trails. And I'll just say a few more words about that. The working farm is Loving Mama Farm. I imagine that there's quite a number of people on this Zoom that have bought their delicious organic produce. It's a no-till regenerative farm run by my son and daughter-in-law. And you can't see it in this picture, but it's right on the other side of the house that you see on the right. The Nature Preserve, Strawberry Fields Nature Preserve, is in conjunction with the Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. They lease the trail from me. Actually, the lease needs to be renewed. That's a reminder for me. I can't tell you how much pleasure this has given me to have the public coming and enjoying Strawberry Fields. And I always hope that everyone leaves here slightly more committed to taking care of nature. Next slide, please. So we started on the road to net zero in 2003. We arrived in 2013. And this is the condensed story of how we changed our lives to mitigate climate chaos. Now, as I said already, this slideshow was done 5 years ago. I would change the word mitigate and say to stop climate chaos, to reverse climate chaos. Mitigating is not enough. In terms of changing our lives, there were all changes for the better, as I mentioned, in terms of quality of life and cost of living. But I just want to say a few words about how I got there. As I said, I've been concerned about the climate for my entire adult life. But while I was working, I didn't have the bandwidth to pay attention to my family as well as my career and do more about climate than I had been. So the 3 R's, all those mitigation kinds of things that I referred to before is what we did. But as soon as I retired, the question was, well, what do I want to do next? And that the next answer was the next question was, what do I really care about? And that was my family and climate. Then the old adage of think global, act local came to mind. And I said, I have to do everything I can to change the story on climate. And I'm not going to talk about doing that until I've done it. The other promise I made to myself was to try to maximize the biodiversity on this piece of land. And in those two promises to myself, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was mirroring the United Nations efforts on both things. There's a COP on biodiversity, which met in Montreal a couple of months ago. Most of you are probably well aware of that. And that out of that came the 30 by 30 objective of protecting 30% of the land by 2030. That's something that I'm active in and helping Mohawk Hudson get there. And of course, there's also the COP on climate change, which met in Egypt last, but famously in Paris with some good agreements reached, unfortunately not met yet. But that's how I got to this road to net zero that I want to tell you about this evening. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the first thing that has to happen to get to net zero is to make sure that your house, that wherever you're living, if it's something you can do something about, is well insulated and keeps the heat and cool in rather than leaking it out. As you can see, this is an old farmhouse that's been somewhat modernized and taken care of. Actually, it was just repainted before this picture. And this picture was taken on the first day of a family reunion kind of party that ended up with 125 people here at Strawberry Fields for the weekend. Well, not all of them stayed here, but there was a lot of camping for sure. I won't dwell on that, but on the house, over the 10 years on the road to net zero, we did 2 blower door tests on this house in an attempt to close up any leaks and insulate it, to tighten it up and make it very energy efficient. So again, this is the first thing that has to happen to get onto the road to net zero. Don't waste the energy, however it's being produced, by having a leaky house. And it is possible, even in an old house like this, to tighten it up and be able to retain that heat. So I'll move on to the next slide, because that's really about how do you get renewable energy. And I want to emphasize that even though I'm going to show you 2 slides with solar arrays that I bought and paid for and got paid back by savings within, in the first case, 6 years, in the second case, 8 years. But I do want to emphasize, I know many people don't have the luxury of being able to do solar panels on their property for lots of good reasons. But there's lots of other ways to have renewable energy being supplied to you by the grid. It's easy enough to call. There's numerous companies that are suppliers of renewable energy. It's a phone call or online to give them the information they need to enroll you, and your next utility bill will show that you're getting your electricity from a renewable energy supplier. My grid supplier is National Grid. When I called them, they said, "Oh, well, we give you renewable energy," but that's not really true. Some of it is renewable, and most of what is renewable for them is hydro. Personally, I'm not a big fan of hydro, even though it is very carbon friendly. It's not nature friendly when you dam up a lot of wild rivers, and most of our hydro comes from Quebec in Canada, and that's what they've done up there. And I'm not sure that's such a good idea for the fish and for other aspects of wildlife. In our case, we were able to put up solar panels on this barn, and the timing was interesting. 2009 is when this was installed. Some of you, I'm sure all of you, will remember, maybe don't want to be reminded, that in 2008 we had a financial crisis. The banking system almost fell apart, and it caused a recession, and it caused the federal government to give us a bailout bill called the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act that provided money to the states to encourage renewable energy. And so this first array had a 30% off the top rebate in addition to a tax credit. So that's why the payback was so quick. The other thing that I want to point out, when you are able, if you are able to install your own panels and own them, after you've paid back that cost to yourself, however you end up doing it, that the rest of the electricity that's produced by this array is free. So this array is going to provide electricity free for the rest of my life. So will this next array. And the next slide, Sarah, please. This was a ground mount. It was done the following year. I went back to the installing company and said, "Is this possible to do this again and get the same benefits?" And they said, "Absolutely." So we did it again. And this time I tried to size the array to take account of all the things that I thought would become electric in the future. I undershot by quite a lot, unfortunately. So now in the wintertime, I have to buy electricity from a renewable energy supplier. But we will be solving that later with an addition we're doing, and a new array, a third array on that rooftop. in any event, as I said before, both of these arrays have paid back their costs and savings. All the future generation from these arrays is zero cost to us, and they will last longer than I will. So getting to use renewable energy, as I said in my introduction, that is the big step. That means that everything that you've ever used, it already is an electric appliance or a utility, will be powered by renewable energy rather than coal or gas or something else. So I do want to emphasize that, and emphasize again that owning your own solar panels is not the only way to do this. So please don't look at this and say, oh, I can't do that. You can get renewable energy, and it's a phone call away. Okay, Sarah, next slide. Well, if I had to do this presentation over again, I'd split this slide into 5 or 6 different ones, but the initial purpose of the presentation was broader than Road to Net Zero. So this slide really contains all of the actions we took to make sure we were swapping out fossil fuel for renewable electricity. And the first thing that we were able to do was to get an electric car. Not this car, it was a Chevy Volt with a V as in Victor, which was an electric car, but it had a gas generator on it. So when the battery ran out, the gas generator would provide power to move the car. However, it was very different than all the hybrids that are out there, the Priuses and so forth, because it only used electricity to drive the wheels, not a gas engine driving the wheels. And in that, it was revolutionary. Chevy decided to move on when they introduced the Bolt, which we got in 2017. As you can see, the license plate, I get a lot of people running up to me in parking lots asking questions about electric vehicles. And recently, we were able to trade in our pickup truck. This is a big property that I manage, and sometimes I need a truck to do things like to tow materials up and things like that. So we traded in a diesel truck for an electric truck. And they both came from the same manufacturer, the F-Series. F-250 traded in for an F-150 Lightning. And it's like all the electric cars I've driven, it's a wonderful experience. Not only are they quick and fun to drive because they have a low center of gravity with a battery underneath it, but the big thing is that, yes, of course, you don't have to put any gas in it. So there's a savings right there. The cost of the electricity to charge a battery is roughly half what it would cost to get the same miles out of a gas engine. But more importantly, the maintenance and servicing on these electric vehicles is practically zero. I say that because all cars have tires that wear, and you have to replace them once in a while. In my case, I have winter tires and summer tires because of driving conditions here. And if anybody has ever visited Strawberry Fields or Loving Mama Farm here, you know that we have a very, very steep driveway coming up. And in the wintertime, it's a challenge. But in terms of maintenance, the only things that I've ever had to do with any of these vehicles so far is change the tires, the wiper blades once in a while, and make sure there's wiper fluid. But there's no emission control system to go wrong or have to be fixed or maintained. There's no oil in the vehicle at all, no transmission that needs to be serviced and maintained. All the things that costs gas cars $500 to $1,000 every time you bring it in for their servicing have disappeared. And on these electric cars, I don't even really use the brakes. Because the one pedal driving, you take your foot off the accelerator, you come to a stop, you learn how to time it so that you don't have to use the brakes at all to come to a stop at a stop sign or something like that. So I can't say enough about getting an electric car. People worry about range, but honestly, it's never stopped me from doing anything I wanted to do to get somewhere in a car. I drive down to New York City fairly frequently, not really frequently, but often enough. There's superchargers on the throughway. It's just an easy trip. I have some time on the way to check my email and read the newspaper and stuff like that. It changes the planning for a trip a little bit. If you want to take a really long road trip, that requires more planning, but that's going to get a lot easier as we go forward. There's a lot of money in the recent bailout bill for building out an electric charging network. There are already significant charging networks, particularly from Tesla, and Tesla is committed by 2024 to be allowing anybody with an electric vehicle to charge in their network. There's other manufacturers that are doing the same thing. To me, this is a no-brainer. I haven't met anybody that's gotten an electric car that didn't end up loving them pretty quickly. And I don't think none of us are going to go back to an ICE car. And frankly, by 2035, you won't be able to buy a new ICE car. ICE, I'm sorry, is an acronym for internal combustion engine. Sorry to throw that in. Okay, so the first thing to swapping out fossil fuel for renewable electric is getting an electric car. If you're only riding a bicycle these days, more power to you. You don't need to get a car. That's great. But many of us, especially in an area like this in the Capital District, need a car to live our lives. So the second thing we did, the second bullet point, is we converted our propane home heating system to geothermal that runs on an electric heat pump. Now, I'm not going to try to explain how this works, but geothermal heat pumps use the ground as a heat sink. And during the winter, the system picks up a fraction of a degree from that heat that's down 6 feet in the ground and boosts it over a period of time to a temperature that will heat the house. That the only negative that I can say about having an electric heat pump heating your house is that if you leave a window open or a door open and the house gets very cool, 20 degrees less than what you want in the wintertime, a geothermal heat pump will take a couple of hours to heat that room back up to the set temperature. It's not like a furnace, an oil furnace, which when that goes on, you're pumping out 400-degree air. And the problem, of course, is when it goes off, you're pumping out nothing. And so you get these cycles of heat and cold in your house. Whereas with geothermal, it's a steady heat. I don't really bother adjusting thermostats for nighttime use and stuff like that because it really isn't necessary. Geothermal heat pumps is the way we went. There's other kinds of heat pumps that I don't mention on this slide, but they're called air-to-air heat pumps, also called mini splits. They work the same way, but instead of using the ground as a heat sink, they use the air. Now, these utility devices, appliances, have been very common in the southern states for decades because it never gets that cold down there. And the nice thing about a heat pump is not only does it provide heat in the wintertime, but you flip the switch and you get air conditioning in the summertime. Something, unfortunately, that all of us are going to wish we had as the climate continues to heat up. And we get these long heat waves as we've experienced in a number of recent years. The air-to-air or mini split heat pumps are not as efficient as geothermal because the air is not a constant temperature. And that means they have to run more at certain times to create the heat or the cold that you're looking for. But one way or another, it is totally doable today. If you have a 20 or 30 or 40-year-old oil furnace in your cellar heating the house, you can change that out for a heat pump and use the rest of your distribution system the same way. It doesn't matter if it's radiators, hot water radiators, or a radiant floor or hot air. In any of those cases, the heat pump will still provide heat for you. And that goes for both geothermal and for mini splits. So that's another great way to swap out fossil fuel for renewable electricity. And instead of buying propane or fuel oil, you're buying renewable electricity. You're being kind to the planet. Okay, so then the third thing we did was we replaced our propane water heater with a heat pump water heater. Same idea as the geothermal, except in this case, it is an air-to-air heat pump, sits on top of the water heater. It looks very much like a water heater that's in your basement right now, maybe a little bit taller because of the heat pump on the top. Same downside in terms of how fast it will heat up water if you have a high demand for it. If you have 15 people staying at your home for the weekend, which happens pretty regularly here, it won't heat up as fast. But most of these heat pump water heaters also have an electric coil, and when you get high demand, that coil takes over and provides hot water faster, just like your current electric hot water heater. So another great way to eliminate the fossil fuel in favor of renewable electricity. I'm sorry, just going to admit that person there. Welcome, Randy. So moving on, those were our three greatest uses of fossil fuel, and we eliminated them all by 2013, which is why that's the year that I said we got to net zero. I also may have to maintain this property, the nature trail in particular. For years, I did that with my diesel tractor. Now it's done on an electric ATV, much quieter, much lighter on the land, a great substitute for that fossil fuel. We have lawns. I know a lot of people think we shouldn't have lawns that we mow, but I mow it with a lithium-ion battery zero-turn mower. That means that I can see the wildlife more easily because there's no trees and vegetation in the way. And that's one of the things I love about being here. And even the chainsaw and weed whacker and other hand tools, they're all battery electric now. So one last point on this slide before we move on. I have not yet eliminated all the fossil fuel usage. We have still 2 diesel tractors and another diesel piece of equipment that I use to keep the driveway clear in the wintertime. That's again, if you have been on the driveway, you know what a challenge that might be. The skid steer that we have now makes that much easier and safer. So I haven't been able to eliminate that. There will be a day where those kinds of machines come with big batteries and run on electricity. We're not there yet. In my case, I have the privilege and luxury of having 30 acres plus of trees. And so I have a lot of heat sink activity going on here and sequestering of carbon. That helps offset that small diesel usage. It's not like we drive them every day. They're task oriented. So that's the full disclosure on that. I'm not totally pure yet. Hopefully get there eventually. Okay, so next slide. That's all the things that I did to get to net zero. These are all things that most people can do. I encourage you to do them. Pick the best one. Think about where you're using fossil fuel, and ask yourself how you can eliminate it. Sarah, there's more slides. They went away. I apologize for not being clear on that, but you're bringing it back, right? Yeah. The rest of this presentation has to do with other things we've done that are very climate friendly. but are not in the category of reducing or eliminating fossil fuel usage. And I'm hoping that Sarah's going to be able to figure. See, she's chewing.
Hold on, Jeff. It's coming up. Little technical difficulty. I'm getting back to it.
Okay.
My mouse sometimes doesn't work right. Okay, here we go. Desktop share. Oh, golly.
And there we go. Okay, that's
Wait a minute. I got to find the slides. It's coming.
That's the next one. That's where we want to be. Nice job. Thank you, Sarah. So I mentioned Loving Mama Farm earlier. And I mentioned also it's a regenerative working farm run by my son and daughter-in-law. It's USDA organic certified. It's no-till agriculture. It's vegetables and flowers. And they also do community supported agriculture, CSA. And in this picture, you can see rows of vegetables. And in particular, right there to the right of the dialog box, you see a row of several kinds of lettuce. That lettuce would have been harvested a couple of weeks later. It would have covered the whole row. And what they do is that when they harvest that row, all of that stuff goes into the packing shed to be washed and prepared for market. And the same day, they plant the next crop in that row. So every row gets 4 or 5 crops a year, depending on what is planted. They rotate those also. They're usually always planting seedlings. So the weeds really never get a chance to take over those rows. They do in the aisles, but not in the rows. So that's part of the method that's no-till. Again, it's organic, so they don't use any pesticides or herbicides. It's a wonderful thing to watch. I'm very proud of my son and daughter-in-law for being able to accomplish what they've done since they arrived here in 2016. They were refugees from California, where they couldn't find land that they could afford to own, and finally came here, and frankly are making out a lot better than they could in California. They were up in Mendocino County, which does not have a lot of people, but here in the Capital District, they're in 6 different markets at Troy, Schenectady, Del Mar, and Saratoga, 2 markets in Saratoga. There's a lot of people that are loving their produce, and they basically sell out of almost everything that they bring every week. So all of their sales are basically directly to the consumer. That's the most profitable way to do it, no middlemen. Next slide shows you another picture of strawberry fields. You can see the flowers interspersed with other crops. My daughter-in-law, Corrine, is a terrific flower person and arranger. If anybody has somebody in their family that wants wedding flowers or for other occasions, I would recommend them highly. So that's Loving Mama Farm. It's a key piece of strawberry fields and a great gift to my wife and I that we have 3 grandchildren living next door. And we'll come back to them in a minute. Next slide. I mentioned Strawberry Fields is also a nature preserve. The 118 acres are permanently protected by a conservation easement held by Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. There's 3 miles of nature trails that are open to the public all year long. We installed a traffic counter on the trail last year, and now don't have to depend on sign-in sheets to see how many people are coming. And the answer to that is over 1,500 people a year are visiting Strawberry Fields. And anyone can come and enjoy what Strawberry Fields has to offer. We ask that people stay on the trail, but we've planned it carefully so that people can see a lot of what is here. And we also have workshops and other special events, usually in conjunction with Mohawk Hudson or ECOS. This again is one of the greatest pleasures I have. From the house, I can see the top of a car, if there's one in the parking lot by the kiosk, with the sun, reflecting off of it. and it just gives it gives me an uplift every time I see that kind of visit. So next slide. Some of the things you can see here at Strawberry Fields are flowers. This is my favorite wildflower, fringed gentian. It's very beautiful, as you can see, and you can actually see the fringes on the petals in this picture. There have been more than 300 different plant species identified on the land. I was very fortunate early on in this trip that through ECOS and Ruth Schottman and Arden Rausch helped connect me with a team that was doing an inventory of the vascular plants in Montgomery County, which had been undercounted, significantly undercounted. So now there's 25 species in the herbarium that came from Strawberry Fields for Montgomery County. This particular flower is hard to find these days, mainly from habitat loss. It likes wet, limey areas, and those are the first ones to go to development because it's easy to drain. Those of you who visited know there's a spur trail to see this flower in bloom during September and October. The spur trail is open all year, but the flower only blooms in September and October, which is late for flowers, as many of you would know. So it's a real treasure to see in that time of year. Next slide. A couple other flowers I love to see is cardinal flower on the left and trout lily on the right. As I said, there's over 300 plants have been identified here. So if you know your plants, you'll find many more. Next slide. Bird watching is also great. There's over 100 species of birds have been identified here at Strawberry Fields. The American bluebird is certainly a favorite. Next slide. Not everybody likes Canada geese, but we do. We have a front row seat on their activities on this wetland, and they're taking off because they sort of caught sight of my head when I came over the rise. And I would also say, while I'm on birds, that we, starting in 2020, we had an antenna installed on an upper field. It's an organization, it's a collaboration organization called MODIS. And researchers are now tagging birds that they're studying, as again, I think everybody here knows that bird populations have plummeted over the last 30 years. And so researchers are studying the birds with technology that is a big improvement from bird banding. They put a little backpack on a bird that has an RFID chip, just like what's on a credit card these days. And any bird with that tag on it that flies within 10 miles of the antenna is picked up, recorded. The information goes via a cell phone to a database. Anybody can see the database. So we've had a number of birds identified going over Strawberry Fields as part of those research projects. And my favorite sighting was, I think it's called a Tennessee warbler, which was tagged in southeastern Ohio in the middle of April, and 2 weeks later flew over Strawberry Fields. So that was a lot of fun I didn't see the bird. We don't count those birds as seen at Strawberry Fields really, but that was just a special pleasure. Next slide. Well, I mentioned 3 grandchildren living next door, but we have 10, and this is 8 of them, the younger ones. The 2 older ones are twins, and they're in their mid-20s now. But this is the Grandkid Conservation Corps. And that day, this was 5 years ago, we're headed out to plant American chestnut seedlings. We are looking to add another species to Strawberry Fields, where we expect to reestablish the American chestnut that until a century ago dominated the eastern woodlands. The way that is hopefully going to happen is that we'll be planting near the 10 native seedlings that we planted, 10 modified trees that are blight resistant. There's one gene from wheat that it has been exchanged into the 42,000 genes of an American chestnut and gives it blight resistance. And it's awaiting approval by a variety of federal agencies right now. Some of you have probably written letters of support for that. Thank you if you have. Another funny part of this story is you see the kid standing on the left-hand side towards the back with a headdress and something held in his hand. That's Oliver. And I picked out all the sites for these trees to be planted because that required some real thought and consideration as to how close they were and stuff like that. When we got to the first site, I said, and we had 10 seedlings with us that were of various sizes. Who wants to plant the first tree? And Ollie's hand shot up. All the other kids were older and they were thinking about it. And he picked the biggest seedling. And now that tree is 8 feet tall. It's the biggest one of all the ones we planted. It just shows to get in there early and you get rewarded for it. And that ATV in the picture is indeed an electric ATV. It doesn't use any gas and can be driven by a kid as well. So that's the Grandkids Conservation Corps. I'm very proud of them. And they each have their own tree. And over time, I hope they'll continue to take some responsibility for maintaining that tree in good condition, as well as the new trees that'll come. And eventually we will have a bunch of chestnuts planted by the squirrels and the chipmunks and eaten by same and the deer and the woodchucks and raccoons and everybody and us. We will eat some chestnuts from our property here. Next slide, please. Oh, there's the Modus antenna. Well, I didn't remember this slide was in there. This is what I was talking about. Not the most beautiful thing, but you can barely see it from the nature trail, which is running in this picture right before the tree line in the background. So people usually miss it, I think, when they're taking a walk, unless it's pointed out. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is where I thank you all for visiting Strawberry Fields with me here today. If you haven't visited it physically in person yet, I hope you'll come. There's something to see every time of the year. We still get regular visitors even in the middle of the winter. When we have snow, which hasn't been very much this year, people enjoy snowshoeing and skiing. And I do too, I particularly skiing. So I've put 30 miles on my skis already, even though we haven't had much snow. Doesn't take much for me to glide on. So thank you very much for listening to me this evening. And I'm hoping there'll be some questions or comments that people would like to make and have a little chat for the rest of our time.
Jeff, that was just great. Thank you so much. So I'll let everybody just unmute themselves as you have questions. Maybe you can raise your hands or so.
While I'm waiting for that, I just want, and of course they've left already for their next thing. Don and Lois Porter. I've been talking to them for the last, I met them about 20 years ago. They were the first people to come up from Mohawk Hudson to see the property about protecting it. And they liked what I was saying, and they bought an electric car right after I did. And they put up the solar panels too, and they're still working on how to get a heat pump into their life. But they started on their own trip at that time. I really appreciate them for that.
Wow. So go ahead, Marcia.
Do you have? Shall I go?
Yeah, go ahead, Marcia. We'll start with you.
Okay. I live in a condominium and I've long wanted to, take some steps toward this, but how would you approach, what would you have to do? Approach a board to get this kind of activity, like all the conversion to electric heat, which we have electric heat here, and we went off the electric heat many years ago to go on natural gas. So that's what we have now. But I would like to, totally convert if possible. I do have a portion of my my heating and electricity come through natural sources. So I don't know. Have you heard anything about how people in condominiums are doing?
Not specifically, but I can give my opinions on it. There isn't a lot you can do about the heating system in that kind of living situation.
Mhm.
Although no system lasts forever.
Yeah.
So start lobbying the landlord for when that system starts to wear out, that you'd like to see it replaced by a heat pump. Get all your neighbors to do the same thing, and they may well get the message. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, what you do want, I imagine you're paying your own electric bill.
Yeah.
And so what you can do is call. Again, there's a number of suppliers. I could tell you the one I used, but it's not that they're the only one by any means. And convert your electric supply to renewable energy.
Uh-huh.
And preferably wind and solar, as I said, not so much hydro, not nuclear, which sometimes gets included.
Yeah.
I have real problems with nuclear, although
Yeah.
it may be part of what has to happen for a while. But that you can do with again, it's a phone call. It's very easy. You give them your account number and who your grid supplier is, and the next bill you'll see that you're getting your electricity from that renewable supplier.
Okay.
So beyond that, if you have a vehicle that you're driving and
A hybrid.
it's a hybrid, fine.
Yeah, because we don't have any charging stations here, which is.
Well, yeah. So it depends where your condo is in relation to, or whether there's a garage that you can put it in or something.
Yeah.
But this is a problem in cities, particularly in terms of charging. And I should mention that I used to live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And after we got the Chevy Volt back in 2011, I was making a visit down to that neighborhood, and right down the street on the next block, there was an apartment dweller. These are all row houses, brownstones. They were on the ground floor. They ran an extension cord out to their car, parked on the street, and put a protective thing over it so people wouldn't trip. And they charged the car there. So
I'd like to know what that protective thing was they put over it, because I don't feel that I could really safely run a cord from.
it's just a piece of rubber. I don't know where they got it, but you see them on construction sites all the time where there is a sidewalk that has cords running across it, and they put this kind of thing to protect the cords, basically.
Okay.
So, a little ingenuity can go a long way in this quest.
Okay. All right. So I guess I should bring that up with the management company that I want to run a cord across the sidewalk.
Yes.
Into the...
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I bet you have to get permission for that, right?
Yes. I think that's going to be a challenge.
Well, I as I said in my introduction, things are changing fast.
Yeah.
I think that building managers know that
Yeah.
they're going to get a heat pump in their future. It's a question of when. And if all their residents are saying they would like to be on a heat pump and using renewable energy for that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't rule it out. Don't be pessimistic about it.
Okay. Thank you.
I see another hand up.
Let's go with Carol and then Christopher after that.
Okay.
Oh, this is Carol's husband.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Carol's husband.
It's okay.
Could you speak a little bit about the costs and any payback times, if there in fact is one, of the two kinds of heating that you mentioned, geothermal and the air exchanger?
Yes, of course. Well, so both of them do have paybacks, especially if you're heating with fuel oil right now, but even today, propane definitely gets a payback. Natural gas is the cheapest of the fossil fuels out there. Has a little bit better heat value than propane, but you can get a payback there too. In my case, the payback on my arrays was 6 years on the first one, 10 years on the second one. I'm sorry, 8 years on the second one. That would be also true for mini splits, which is the other kind of heat pump that I mentioned, which uses the outside air. The difference is there's two differences. One is they're a lot cheaper to install. Geothermal is expensive because you have to either dig a big trench or drill holes in the ground to get the heat sink effect. The benefit of that versus air is that it costs a lot less to run it. You don't run it as much because it's much more efficient. But the mini splits cost a fraction of the geothermal. And I can give you some numbers if you wish. The first array that we did was something like $40,000. When we installed a mini split in an outbuilding to just provide heat for that outbuilding, it was $3,000. So a big difference. But the other difference is operating cost. The geothermal unit would run much less than the mini split does. The mini split would cost roughly twice as much to run as a comparable geothermal. So, but you'd still get a payback because you lay out much less money up front, and you are going to save money versus the fossil fuel that you're using. So does that answer your question? Okay, good. Thank you. Great.
All right, so Christopher?
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment on, do you have a power wall? Do you use any batteries? And could you comment on, I mean, right now, the sun's been down for 2 hours, and you're probably running your heat pump right now. That heat pump is being run by a natural gas fired power plant in New York State, or on the grid, the asynchronous grid right now. But
No.
anyway, could you comment on, you're not off grid, and to go off grid, of course, you'd have to go with batteries. But if you could just comment on batteries and power walls.
I will, but the first thing I want to do is to disabuse you of that last assertion. The electricity I'm running my heat pump on right now, because it is nighttime, is renewable energy that's coming from being delivered by National Grid to my house, but it's solar and wind produced by another company.
Well,
So,
no, but there's no solar. Well, no, okay, yeah. If you looked at the synchronous grid that we're on, there's no solar right now anywhere on that grid, probably. Yeah. And the wind.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
Not on the eastern coast asynchronous. The synchronous grid right now, it's all night. And no, all I'm saying, and I don't want to. I understand what you're saying about there is solar or wind probably being produced somewhere, but it's only a small fraction of the electricity being produced right now at this instant. Now, I'm not. I don't want to belittle, but just if you could comment on batteries is all. That's the main thing I'm interested in.
I will, but I think that we have to understand that the electricity I produce during the day, I don't use all of it. That goes back to the grid. It's in the grid.
Yeah, but it's only used right. I mean, all electricity is used the minute it's produced. So a power plant you are using a net zero, but if every fossil fuel plant went off right now, you would be dead in the water. Everyone would be. But anyway, I don't.
Buying the renewable electricity from a company that has wind assets and solar assets. The wind blows during the night too. So
no, you're right. But that at 1% or 10% of the total.
Let me go to batteries. The answer is I don't have them yet, but I have them on order. So I mentioned briefly that we're doing an addition to the house. I know this is counterintuitive for many people of my age that usually we're downsizing. We are upsizing because, again, we have 10 grandchildren and all their friends and our kids' friends, and people want to visit. And right now, even though it's not a small house, it gets awfully crowded when that happens and our life gets disrupted. So this addition was designed with that in mind, as well as having a very nice large south-facing roof that we'll be putting a third array on as soon as it'll be probably in 3 or 4 months that'll happen. And along with that, we are also getting 5 Tesla power walls. They'll be mounted in the garage. And for those of you that are not aware, Tesla has a big and growing business doing batteries used for residential and commercial purposes. And those batteries will provide nighttime coverage for us. So we'll charge them during the day with solar and then use it at night. They'll also provide backup for grid outages. Now, right now, and I failed to mention it in my slideshow, but the one remaining propane use that we have is a backup generator for our existing house. And so that, that tests itself once a week. And when the grid goes out, it's very nice to have the house backed up, needless to say. The lights go off for a second and then they come back on. So that's our current backup method. But for this addition, we will have the power walls and they will provide the night coverage. And that is the way to do it. And it's even cleaner in a way than what I was trying to convince you of in terms of my nighttime usage. It's a funny thing. Electricity is a commodity. Once it goes into the grid, you can't tell where it came from. I would have to get much more expert on that than I really want to be to see how it is that I can still claim that I'm using renewable electricity at nighttime for this house as it is now. But be that as it may, I'm going to batteries, and the only trouble with batteries right now is they're really pricey.
Oh, that was going to be my question. The cost,
yeah,
you double the cost of a renewable system the minute you put batteries in it. By the way, I use a corded lawnmower, not a battery lawnmower, for just that reason. You can save money on a corded. An extension cord is a little more cheaper than a battery.
Yeah. Well, it depends how much lawn you want to mow.
No, and that is a big problem that I've heard. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I think that answers your question. I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you
for asking. Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
Hey, well, if we don't have any now, there's a bunch of things I want to see when I'm out there, like those American chestnut seedlings and so forth. But if nobody else has any burning questions right now, we'll sign off for tonight. Let me just remind you that our next month's speaker is combined with our meeting. So our meeting, all membership meeting, is at 6 o'clock. And then the speaker will be Josh Stiller talking about the research with migratory birds in the area at 7. So Jeff, that was just really great. I really enjoyed it. And I do have a lot more questions when I see you out on the property that I'm excited about.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your attention, and nice seeing you all. And we had a nice turnout for this. I appreciate your time. Okay, thank you very much.